with that done, I can put that to one side with the case and deal with the shutter blades. And the shutter blades need to be cleaned. And it depends how bad they are or how ugly they are as to what work's going to be required here. Let's get these blades separated out. Now the blades are a little bit marked. I'm not sure, looking at that, whether those are marks that will come off easily with a bit of naphtha, or whether I'm going to have to polish those blades with some brasso metal polish. So we'll start by cleaning one and seeing what happens. This one here is quite marked, and the marks that I'm seeing are like a bit of roughness to the blade. It's not looking smooth and shiny, and there's probably, I can feel this as you start cleaning the blades. You can feel the surface. If the surface is clean and smooth, the cotton bud will just slide over it. There's no friction to notice. When it's rough, you will feel it as you're cleaning them. And that's an indication when you've got something clean. It's also an indication of when the surface is not smooth and highly polished anymore. And the surface there, it's probably very light surface corrosion. I don't think it extends down through the coating on the blade. It's got some sort of bluing on the blade. I don't think it extends down through that, but it's certainly roughness there. And it looks ugly. So I want to see the back of that, so cleaning with brasso is the next thing to do. Right, I have the one shutter blade sitting here up on this hard foam block, and I will use a cotton bud to hold it in position and another cotton bud to polish it with some brasso metal polish. Be careful not to bend the blades. If you bend the blades, it can be very, very difficult to straighten them out. The shutter blades aren't as fragile as the diaphragm blades in shutters typically, but you still need to be careful. And as I'm polishing this, you'd have heard the sound change. Now some of that will be that the abrasive has just disappeared, but the rest of it is that the blade, the contaminants on the blade, the roughness of the blade has been polished off, and so therefore the cotton bud will move smoothly over the top of it. Alright, so all I've got to do is go through all 6 blades and clean them like that. And then I'm going to have to come and clean all that off, any polish off, and clean them again with naphtha to remove any traces of the polish. And hopefully I will have 6 clean, shiny blades. So I'll clean the other 5 blades. I'll bring you back when I'm ready to clean these things down. Well, here's one of the blades all polished. I want to get rid of that metal polish now. And this usually takes 1 or 2 attempts to get it all off the blade and get the blade looking nice and clean. Well, that's looking a lot better already. I'll just pick that up, swing it around in the light a bit for you to get a better idea of what that blade looks like. So I've given that one clean. I'm going to give it another clean with Naphtha. To make sure there's no traces of the metal polish left on that blade. And that looks pretty good to me. I'm quite happy with the state of that. For all practical purposes, it looks like a new blade. So I will clean up its 5 mates and then the shutter can be reassembled. So this is a time-consuming process going through cleaning the blades individually like this, but it really does need to be done if we're ever going to get this shutter to work nicely, as it once did 60-something years ago. Right, with all the blades ready to go, position the blade actuating ring fully anti-clockwise. So this piece is hard up against the tube. And we can start putting the blades on. Now the blades start here. This hole here is where the main shaft comes through, the cocking shaft. So take note of that, that's where the second blade goes, but our first blade goes here. We've got this in the blade's open position. So our first shutter blade goes here. The second shutter blade is the odd shaped one. This one's got a steep cutout in the back of the blade. That goes there. And that cutout is to allow it to clear the shaft coming through the back there. If you get the blades in the wrong positions, you're going to end up in trouble. Because if you have blade 1, 3, 4 or 5 where blade 2 should be, that hole will be partly occluded. And it's fine when the shutter is closed, but when the shutter goes to open, the blade can't swing back out of the way. And as a result, the shutter cannot complete its full range of motion. So it's important that the blades are all in the correct positions. Just manipulating these blades to get, I've just dropped a blade, hang on. Manipulating these blades to get them around the right way. This isn't going smoothly, is it? I can do this without dropping the blade again. That's blade number 5. Now blade number 6 is the narrow blade. This one, the capping blade. That goes directly over the top of the position of blade number 1. Okay, so all the blades are in position there. Now I'm just going to close these blades up slightly by moving the blade actuating ring to make it easier to fit the case over the top. So if I nudge the blade actuating ring in a bit like that, if I take it in any more than that, we'll be on the wrong side of the detent and it'll snap shut and the blades will fall out because they won't be supported by the edge of the rim. Right, so there's our case. Here's our mechanism plate, and I've got the case here and I've got to get this over the top. There's a squared hole in the case here, and for some bizarre reason Kodak has you putting a round peg through a square hole. I've never known quite why they did that, why it wasn't a round hole, but perhaps someone had a funny sense of humour in the decal factory where the shutters were made. We'll put these screws in very lightly. The big danger at this point is that one of the blades had moved while you're putting the case over the top. And if that happens, you could end up with your blade trapped between a pin on the blade actuating ring or the case and the mechanism plate and getting damaged. So I'm just checking now that the blades actually close and open smoothly. That all looks good. That means everything's in the right place, probably. It would also work even if I had blade number 2 in the wrong place, except when I went to open the blades they wouldn't open all the way. Right, so that's good. There's the mechanism plate with the blades back in it, and you can see those shutter blades there are looking very good. They're all very uniform, and the finish looks good. There's no fingerprints or that cloudy looking finish to them, which was light surface corrosion. So the shutter is now ready to have the control gear put back on it. Well, with the shutter, the base of the shutter all back together, I'm going to put a little bit of lubricant in a few spots on the blade actuating ring. Now, where the main cam picks up the blade actuating ring, there's a stud here and another stud over here. So I've given them a little wipe with some molybdenum paste. This detent here that I've mentioned earlier, that needs to be lubricated. Now you can tell that you've got a problem if when you move the lever you hear a squeak sound. Almost certainly it's that spring rubbing against that post, and that's undue friction, and it's certainly unwanted if you get a squeak sound there. That's what it'll be. There's a couple of other spots here that are well worth doing. On the tip here, where this will be caught by that bracket, and I'll just move this blade actuating ring around. This tab here, the leading point of that tab has to push this lever back out of the way when the shutter releases. Now that was the motion that basically wasn't happening when I started with the shutter. It wasn't working, that piece, and it wasn't working because there was too much friction, probably at this point, and also at the tip here where that latched onto the other lever. That's all looking good, and I'll put the B lever in place with its return spring. That goes over here, and then we'll put the other little spring in place. The B lever first, I think, because that's a bit easier to deal with. So I'm going to open the shutter up all the way so that the B lever can swing into its most relaxed position, which is when it's locking the blade actuating ring in place, which is there. So the B lever is right up against that lens tube. And the return spring for the B lever is a combination spring, because it's also the return spring for the settings lever for the flash, sync speed and the self timer. So I've got to get this in here. Get this spring in correctly. This is awkward, this spring. See if I can get this down in here. Sometimes it's useful just to get the screw started. Then the top part of the spring here, I have to swing that all the way round to this point. And it often lifts off the top of the screw head there. You're going to make sure that's popped down into its little retaining groove. Okay, so that's in place. And I'll tighten up that screw. Check that the B lever moves freely, because the B lever sits over a raised post around the top of the raised post. So you need to make sure that when the screw is tight, that the B lever is free to move. If the B lever is not sitting correctly around the top of that post, then when you tighten the screw, the B lever will be fixed. You won't be able to move it easily. Right, so if I hold back the B lever with my finger, I can pull the blade actuating ring back to the park position, and of course the blade snaps shut. So that's that little part. Now I need to deal with this spring. This spring is very good at getting away, and these are not the ideal tweezers to deal with it. However, they're the tweezers I have in hand, so we'll have a go. And that spring sits over that collar, and it acts on two levers. So I'm holding a toothpick over the centre so the spring can't get away. I've got to pick the end of the spring up with my tweezers, lift it round and get it behind this pin on this lever. So this lever is now sprung loaded. This lever is now sprung loaded. So that went without a hitch. But it's most important when you're trying to get that spring in place to hold something over the centre. I typically use a toothpick. You could use a screwdriver. You can use anything you like. But the main thing is to make sure that that spring does not have an opportunity to ping off into the distance, which it certainly will do with monotonous regularity. That spring, virtually no one's got any spares of that spring, and the reason they don't have any spares is they've all been used up over the years after the spring took off, got lost in the corner of the room, and they had to use one of their spare parts in order to finish their job. Right, so far so good. I'll carry on with this shutter. I don't think I mentioned earlier that I've got the shutter sitting in a front plate taken from a Retina Reflex S camera. Just makes a very good convenient platform to hold the shutter while I'm working on it. If you haven't got that, a block of wood would suffice. Okay, so what have we got to put in next? Let's see. I think this stuff can go in next. This is the settings lever for the self timer and the flash sync speed setting. So I'm going to take a little bit of molybdenum paste and there's a little detent spring in the case under here. I'm just running a little bit of molybdenum paste over that. That detent spring runs against this pin here, on that bracket. There's also a little tab on this bracket there. You can see it's got a little fork on the end of it. There's some notches in there. I usually give that a wipe with molybdenum paste too, just so that it drops in and out easily. Now I will put that to one side. I want to put another couple of pieces in here first. Alright, so these pieces, this is the pallet wheel, which rattles backwards, and the pallets rattle backwards and forwards on that. That controls the speed of the flash sync setting. These parts I've all cleaned manually, which means just using a cotton bud and some naphtha and swabbing them down taking great care to make sure that there's no lumps or bumps left, that any old grease is removed, and that gives you an opportunity to look at the parts closely. In fact, it forces you to look at them closely while you're cleaning them, and then you're more likely to spot any problems. Now I'm going to fit this spring. So it hooks over that, it'll hook on that post there. If I stretch it out, drop it into a hole in the arm here on that little sector here. And that can be cocked. If I swing this across, it'll cock. This little arm here drops behind it to hold it in place. And as soon as I move the blade actuating ring, you'll see that that arm is pushed out of the way, which releases this and allows the flash sink to run down. That's how that part works. Now let's get that lever in that I spoke of. This one goes in from the back. Now the pin on it, or the post, drops into this slot here, but it must be behind the spring. You can just see probably a spring here, so this needs to sit behind that. Sometimes the spring will just catch on the post, on the step of that pin, as it's doing at the moment, so it's going to pull that back to allow that pin to drop down. Okay, it's just done that. That's sitting there nicely now. And this is the retainer that goes on there. So there's a little notch in here which fits over that little tube. And you may have to press this lever in so that the spring-loaded pin here can drop into a notch on that setting lever. And we have 3 screws that hold this in place. Check that you've got 3 screws that are all the same length, because there's a similar looking screw that holds the speed retard gear train in position, but it's slightly shorter from memory. You want 3 matching screws, and there won't be much difference in it, probably 1/4 millimetre, something like that. Okay, so that part's all good. I'll pop this back in the stand because it's convenient to use it. Okay, so I've got my lever in place there now. I want to set the rest of the flash sink components in here, and then I can put the trigger on there, the shutter release. So what I want here is I need to start with this lever. It's got a spring sticking out from it at quite an angle, which provides quite a bit of tension. Now I normally run a wiper molybdenum paste through the centre of that, and this fits over this post here. There's a spring here, it's a flash contact. You sort of have to push it under that. So I'm bringing the spring against the inside of the case, so it's under tension, and you couldn't see through my finger unfortunately, but I swung that into position. The spring here is acting against the case, the little flash contact's just sitting here, minding its own business. Now the moving flash contact can go on. This fits here on top of that thing we've just put in place. I'm going to make sure I don't get the end of it, this end, trapped behind the contact. So this should be on the inside. Just checking the look of that. Oh, that's fine. Now if I cock this action, I don't think I put any molybdenum paste on the end of that lever there, did I? No, that lever there we need to put a touch of molybdenum paste on there. That was our prime problem, lack of lubrication at that point. That was one of the main reasons the shutter would not fire when I first inspected it. Let's get this back in position. Get this back in position. And I'll swing that arm across to cock that. This piece goes on next. We're trying to line up 2 shoulders on the posts, one at each end, and get it over the pin here. And this arm should be flopping around nicely like that. 2 screws here. Small screw at this end. Why is this not sitting in the holder properly? It's better. So small screw at that end, that can be done up. Now there's a return spring and a shoulder screw to go on here. If I can just get the spring positioned correctly, it sits on there, sticking to my tweezers. And I think my tweezers are magnetic. I'll just try another pair. Sits on there. And the shoulder screw is a shoulder that the spring can revolve around. So when you do the screw up, you need to make sure that the spring is not trapped under the shoulder, that it can revolve around the shoulder. Otherwise it'll just be stressed out and end up breaking. I'm just checking that that's the case, that the spring moves freely. Tighten that up. And I need to get that spring hooked into place. Now the loose end of the spring, this one here, needs to come all the way back here. There's a notch in the back of this arm right down here. I need to lift that spring over and hook it into that notch. Like that. Sometimes this spring might lift off over the shoulder, so you've got to make sure that it's around the shoulder still, that it hasn't popped out of place. But now you can see that this lever is sprung loaded. Okay, so I'll just move my blade actuating ring slightly, which will run down that flash thing we set. And I can put the shutter release in place. Here's our shutter release, or a trigger. Normally I just give the shaft of this a very light wipe with molybdenum paste, not as much as that. That drops down here. The tab here comes under the B lever. Now the return spring for this lever. Commonly with the synchro contour shutters, the spring comes up against the inside of the case. In this case, that spring has to be lifted up and brought all the way around and tucks down on this side of the speed train. Otherwise there'll be insufficient tension there to return the shutter release to the rest position. So this can be entertaining, getting that spring across. and today is obviously not my day. Right, well now it's sitting behind the screw head, but it's not tucked down into position. Now it is. So my lever is seated all the way down. The tail of that spring is tucked under this plate and nothing is coming adrift. That's what we wanted to see. Next up, the main drive cam. Now the main drive cam in this shutter was pretty much devoid of any lubrication at all. I'm just going to give that a wipe through the centre with some molybdenum paste. This curved edge, that needs to be lubricated. It doesn't need much. You could just be using graphite grease to do that. That'd be fine. That runs against the retard gear train, and if it's absolutely clean, there'll be a lot of friction there and it won't work well. Now these tabs here and here are where this thing picks up the blade actuating ring as it's revolving and opens and closes the blades. So that's our rest position there. In the cocked position it's round here. The cocked position is round here. The shutter's released, that swings this arm out of the way and allows the cam to start moving, and you can see it's pulled the blades open. Now all the action stops until I release the shutter release, which pulls the arm out there and allows this to move. That's because in the rest position here, with nothing holding it back, the B lever drops into position. So the shutter works on the B setting. Once it's got the settings cam on the front, the B lever only drops in when it's set to B. So that's all set back in position, and I need to fit my spring there. Now the spring in this case, in this camera, the spring is here and it's pretty much exhausted. If we take this tab as being at the 12 o'clock position, the upright post here, the upright tab, is at about the 4 o'clock position. That's about as tired as these things ever get. I don't think they get any worse than that. I've got to do something about that. A good spring, if this is the 12 o'clock position, this little pin would be up at about the 2 o'clock position. And that means that in its rest position, it would be providing more tension on the cam. And it mostly makes the difference at the rest position, not at the fully extended position where you've cocked it and it's got plenty of pressure at that point. It's when it's back in the released position. So if it's pretty gutless, you'll find that you have problems with your slow speeds, and you may find that the shutter is reluctant to run correctly on the slow speeds, or you may find that you can adjust the shutter so that the 1/8 of a second appears to be fine, but the 1/15 of a second appears to run at a funny speed. It might appear to run fast, or it might appear to run slow. It often comes down to this, that there's insufficient tension at the almost closed point of the shutter. And at this shutter in particular, I think that when we looked at it to start with, sometimes the shutter blades didn't close completely, and that would be pretty much a classic symptom of a sticky shutter with a very exhausted spring. So deal with that spring next. So here we have the spring from this camera. Here I've got a bag with some new springs in it. Ones that I was able to purchase fairly recently. I'll pull one of these out. And we'll compare the two. Well, apart from the fact that this is much cleaner and shinier looking, you'll see that this tab here is at about the 2 o'clock position. This tab's at about the, being generous, between 3 and 4. This is what the spring should look like. This is what the springs look like when they're very tired. what we want to do is get something that looks more like that. And I've got a little tool here which allows me to unwind the spring, return that to its rest position. So if I rotate this around to about that position, that should give me a spring that looks something more like what we want. Here we go. It's not quite as tight as the new one, but it's pretty close. I can probably move it slightly further. If you overdo this, it'll just end up with a distorted spring, which is a complete waste of time. So I've got this marked with some little marks here so I can see where I'm going. We'll go that far. Here we go, that's pretty close. That's probably close enough for me. I don't think I'd push my luck trying to get that spring around any tighter. So what we've done effectively is unwind the spring. Now the problem with trying to unwind a spring of this nature is that if you just grab one end and the other end with a pair of pliers and twist, you'll end up almost certainly distorting the spring quite a lot. One of the coils will open, near the end probably, one of the coils will open right up and you won't make much impression on the other coils. What I do with the tool is the spring is constrained. It can't open up beyond a certain point, and as a result you don't get a lot of distortion. So that spring is probably going to function pretty much the same as a new spring would have. Is it as good as a new spring? No, probably not. Is it a hell of a lot better than what it was before? Yeah, definitely. If you could get springs like that for your camera, things would run much better. Okay, so that can now go into the shutter. Okay, well I'll take my spring and I'll give it a very light wipe of molybdenum paste through the inside and see if I can get this thing in place. Now the little tab, the one that was sticking up at the 2 o'clock position, has to drop down into a hole in the main cam there. And this tab here has to be lifted up and swung all around here, and it drops into a notch there. Now getting that to happen is not always easy. That one went very well as could be hoped for really. So that spring now has a lot more tension at its rest position, at its most closed position. And so that'll probably work fine. We cock the shutter, cock the main spring, release the shutter, and it bangs, it's away straight away. So that's good, that's what we wanted. Of course this shutter wouldn't fire at all when I first got it because of lack of lubrication. Next thing I need to achieve is put the speed trains in place. The retard gear train and the self timer. And these, I suspect, have been cleaned within an inch of their life like the rest of the shutter. But I'm going to clean them again in the ultrasonic cleaner, just so I've got them in a known state. And what I do is I put these in a little jar of naphtha, and I put the little jar of naphtha into my ultrasonic cleaner surrounded by water, and I'll give it 10 minutes and that'll blow out any rubbish that happens to be in here, because we want rid of any old oils, grease, dust, dirt, things of that nature. Once they're all clean and once they're dried, I can lubricate them.